Some people don't want to listen. Most people are good. I've had to speak sternly to a few people, thrown one customer out of the restaurant. You know, if you're not gonna listen and you're gonna be rude to my staff, then I just there's the door. Don't let it hit you on the way out.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Singapore was a COVID-19 success story. He got on top of the wave and forged forward. With Melbourne in the throes of a second lockdown, what light can the Singapore experience shed on our own circumstances? And what has the impact been on the local hospitality industry? Darren Farr is the owner of the Lokal in Singapore. Darren, how you going?
Good, mate. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. We're really quite interested to see what life's been like in Singapore. It's certainly led the charge in trying to get on top of the virus. What's it been like the last 6 months there for you?
It's certainly been interesting, that's for sure. I mean, we've, like everybody, saw how frightening this pandemic could be. But I think we're very lucky that the government here acted quite swiftly. Masks were compulsory from the beginning, and like everyone, lockdown was quite scary. But being on an island and being under lockdown, it's quite beneficial, I guess, because no one can actually come in and it was a bit scary at first, but everybody followed the rules, and that was a good thing.
What was the support like from the government for the hospitality sector, and what sort of impact has this period of time had on your business?
Look, the government's been fantastic here. They have subsidised Singapore wages, not expat wages, but for the Singapore workers, 50% was given to us for the first up until this month, actually, September. And they've just extended that through now at 30% till March. So it's been a big help. That's for sure, particularly we're only a small place. We have 60 seats. 30% of those have gone, and during lockdown we were 60% down on revenue. They've also they made and they changed the laws so you couldn't be evicted. So I just didn't pay my rent. I didn't hear from my landlord for the whole time, but that's partially because my landlord is actually tied to the German government. So they've got their own problems to deal with. But in the end, they came back and said, okay, you don't have to pay for the 4 months. But it was nice to know that you couldn't be evicted. That's for sure. The Singapore government has been fantastic in supporting the people here. It was a bit frightening at first, though. My mum was here, staying with me, and I wanted to keep her here, but couldn't get her visa renewed. So trying to get her back to Australia and dealing with the lockdown and everything was quite stressful. But I am thankful that the support has been here from the government in terms of small business. That's for sure.
You mentioned with the first lockdown, you'd lost 60% of trade. What was that lockdown like?
But that initial lockdown for us was quite lengthy, and it at first it was terrifying because thought, oh, shit, here goes the business. But we were able to adapt, and like many of the people on this podcast, you have your few minutes of tears, etc., and then you just try and get on with it the best you can. But I think it was quite refreshing, actually, to make me particularly and my team look inwards and take a good long look at ourselves. and how we operate and what we could do to improve, and that's been quite beneficial.
What are some of the things that you've changed or have looked to change after having the time to reflect?
The first thing we did was change our operating hours. We used to be a 7-day a week operation, but that was always difficult because you needed quite a lot of part-time staff, and quite a lot more full-time staff. But we decided we would go to a 5-day operation. We always Sunday brunch was always our busiest day, and we always wanted to do Sunday dinners, but we always made excuses. Oh, it's the end of the week. We're too busy. All this sort of thing, and so we decided we'd start doing dinners all the way through from Wednesday. And we basically changed our operating hours as well from 9 till 9. So 5 days a week, 9 till 9 now. Everybody works longer hours on 3 days a week, and it's harder that way, but at least everybody gets a rest. So that was the first thing we decided on. And then we adjusted our menu accordingly, so that we took off anything that we didn't think was takeaway or delivery appropriate. And then my head chef and business partner Max, he's German, and he came up with a WhatsApp chat group with the German community, including the Consular General of Germany. And through that, he did twice a week. He did a houseman's cost, which is basically a German dinner, and that proved very successful for us and brought a lot of new clientele as well through that. So they were the major changes for us.
Will these changes be ongoing beyond COVID?
Yes, we're well, before COVID, I was very anti-delivery platforms, but now I'm very thankful for them. That's for sure. No choice. And Max has continued to. I think it's every couple of weeks now. He does a German dish and blasts it out, and people can eat it at the restaurant, or they can have it delivered, or come and pick it up. So we still have a lot of regulars that come in and bring all their own takeaway containers and pick up his meal every couple of weeks, as they do with our normal menu as well.
You mentioned that there's still tough restrictions there. There's a bit of unrest in Australia at the moment, particularly in Melbourne, with the restrictions that are in place, and the hospitality industry is getting quite vocal about wanting to open up again. What's it like in Singapore with the industry and society? What's the general sense there?
I mean, I think everybody here. Look, there are those, and I don't actually agree with the protesting. I think this is a very dangerous virus, and people don't understand quite how bad it is, and the only way to conquer it is to be responsible and comply to whatever rules the governments are setting, right? And there are those here in Singapore that also are not happy about it, but generally, with the support the government has given us here, most people in the hospital, everyone I know in the hospitality industry, is very thankful, and we're just happy that we're open again. I know it's difficult for some because we have a rule about no alcohol on the table after 10:30. So that affects a lot of bars and restaurants, and they enforce that very strictly. We have what they call social ambassadors who roam around Singapore checking venues. Oh, well, I mean, we get checked twice a day basically for social distancing. Wearing a mask is compulsory for all hospitality staff. There's that one they're very, very heavily strict on. At first, I didn't like the idea at all, but gotten used to it. It can be a funny talking point at times as well. It's a bit hard to understand customers when everybody's wearing a mask. So yeah, but and the social distancing, I was very strict on that from right from the get go, and we arranged our tables and seats according to the 1 metre spacing of seated customers. So that's the way it works here, and some people don't want to listen. Most people are good. I've had to speak sternly to a few people, thrown one customer out of the restaurant.
Wow.
But you know, if you're not gonna listen and you're gonna be rude to my staff, then I just there's the door. Don't let it hit you on the way out. Yeah.
How did you end up in Singapore running a restaurant and owning a restaurant?
Well, my wife at the time, she was a corporate high flyer, and I went round the world with her basically. I first came here in '92, then went on to London, Hong Kong, and back to here. And then she went back on to Australia, and I stayed here and set up the business. It was all a bit by accident, really. I had been a stay-at-home dad for many years, and got back into cooking only when I came here 9 years ago in Singapore, and worked for one of the suppliers here. Had a deli restaurant, and I was head chef there. And after that, realizing that wasn't what I wanted to do, this through a friend, this space came up, and he asked me to join, and so I dived head first in. There were 4 partners in the beginning. Now there's 1. That's a whole other story.
Can you tell us a bit about the restaurant and what the offering is?
Yeah, so when I was actually looking to do something before Local came along, and I was starting to do a lot of experiment R&Ding at home. Started making yogurt, ricotta, smoking stuff. Doing pig's head terrines and stuff like this here. And I realised that there was a lot of quite good coffee in Singapore, but the food offerings in places were quite shocking, actually. So when Local came along, I decided, okay, I want to up the quality of the food in what was known as a cafe back then, but I quickly realised over the years that calling yourself a cafe here pigeonholes you too much. So we sort of try and drop that moniker, and we're now a restaurant, bar, cafe, everything. So I just wanted to be fresh, fast, and affordable. I mean, produce is expensive here. You don't have access to locally grown produce. Everything comes into the island, so you have to, to keep our costs down. We have to find ways of using local produce instead of imported stuff. Try and find the cheaper things that we can and do something good with them. So, and it's I suppose we cater to everyone. We make a lot of stuff in house, as I was saying. Our ricotta, yogurt, our butter, jams, our local kaya. We smoke our own fish in house. So we sort of cover a broad spectrum. Max, I cover the early shifts. Max, so I'm the breakfast person, and then Max comes in with his. We've got a couple of local boys that work in the kitchen with us, and Max does the dinners, and he steps it up a notch from sort of what's just healthy cafe food, I suppose, in Australia terms. And the word Local, when I was looking to name it, because the Goethe Institute is our landlord, I wanted a German word around food, but that's not an easy task at all. And then I discovered that local and local meant the same thing in both languages, but in Germany it also means a casual eating house. So that was a sort of no-brainer for the name.
You mentioned that it's difficult getting access to quality produce, and a lot of it has to come from overseas. Have you had difficulties during COVID to get good produce?
No, the government made sure that all avenues for food coming in were taken care of. We like everywhere had that sort of moment of madness in the supermarkets to begin with, where toilet paper vanished off the shelves and all that sort of thing. But the government, and actually the government has almost had a daily address to the people here, to let them know that there's fake news flying around. This is what we have. This is what we can do.
How did you end up in the industry?
I finished my HSC in 1981, and basically my old man said, "You get a job or start paying rent." And I'd interviewed with. I'd gone to Sydney before my HSC and interviewed with Johnny Walker's Angus Steakhouse, which used to be in Bligh Street in the city. And I got a apprenticeship there. So I literally got the yes on a Thursday, was on a train from. I grew up in Albury Wodonga, and was in Sydney by the Monday, starting an apprenticeship. Realised very, very quickly that cooking was something I really enjoyed, and I think it was hospitality was something, being in restaurants was so cool and so much fun. And then from there I got out for a little while after my apprenticeship because I tried to do hotel catering and management, but they wouldn't credit me the cooking modules for it. So I got a bit pissed off and said, okay, maybe I'll. But after a year, I went back and I think first job back in was working for Peter Rowland's catering. I was taking dishwashing jobs and stuff like that. All I was anything, and then the Powerhouse Museum was opening up, and there were a couple of gun chefs like Neil Perry helping with the catering, and I was thrown in with these two guys, John Sussman and Andy Davies, and they said, "Oh, yeah, let's get this young buck some grief," and they said, "Okay, you're chiffonading 25 boxes of lettuce." And so I did it, and then they gave me 5 boxes of cooked prawns to peel, and I did that, and they went, "Oh, this guy's all right. Let's take him out for a beer in a game of pool." And so that was how I met Sussman, and that was a big. And then later I worked for Andy at Streetons for 3 years, which was one of the best places I've ever worked, and one of the best teams I've ever worked with. And then I briefly worked for Tetsuya when it was just Tets and myself in the kitchen at Roselle, in the old Roselle, before renovations. So
Wow.
there's not too many chefs that can say they just had Tets in the kitchen with them. And then after he renovated, I left because I was moving to Singapore, and I worked for John at Flying Squid Brothers for delivering seafood for a while, and then moved to Singapore, and then it's been Singapore, London. London, I worked for Sir Terence Conran, for John Torode, who at Mezzo, who John's the face of MasterChef these days. And I was a head chef for him at Mezzanine, actually, which was upstairs of Mezzo, and it was the first big Asian noodle bar in London. It was a massive restaurant. We had 400 seats upstairs, 600 downstairs, 1,000 staff, 120 chefs. So it was insane. And then I came back to Australia briefly, ran a Waba Cafe down at Balmoral for a year, and then moved to Hong Kong. All the time following my wife around, who worked for the News Corporation Group, and then in Hong Kong I worked for Cafe Deco Group briefly, and then on to Singapore, and in most of that time was as a stay-at-home dad.
What was the early times like working with Neil Perry and Andy Davies and the illustrious John Sussman?
Oh, well, I actually was lucky enough to, but after Blue Water Grill, Neil consulted for Simon Johnson at his restaurant called the Chelsea in King's Cross, and Simon was a very different Simon back then, and that was when I first worked for Neil, and that was a lot of fun because I loved Blue Water Grill and loved his cooking, and all you know, he went on to do Rock Pool after that, and that was fantastic. And now he's an absolute dead set legend of the industry in Australia. Working for Andy was Streeton's was just such an amazing restaurant at its in its heyday, with the Rogues nightclub downstairs. Peter Simpson, Stan Saris at the helm, and John Pegram, Rod Cox running the front of house as well. It was an incredible team, and I learned so much from Andy in terms of running a kitchen and running a kitchen without any anger. It was always fun and jovial with Andy, which I tried to take as much as I could away from that experience. And Sussman, somehow we always seem to catch up all around the world, actually listening to John's podcast and his Waiter of the Year award, the first time I met John, I think he served me at, I forget which restaurant it was now, but that was even before he started flying squid, when he was still waiting tables. Best waiter in the world in those days.
He'll appreciate you saying that, no doubt. How much have restaurants changed since those days for you?
Oh, quite a lot actually. I think in my day it was still quite very male dominated testosterone type kitchens, and I've had everything in the kitchen thrown at me, I think, at some point around, particularly in London. That was yeah. You learn to duck and weave very quick, and make sure you get the job done. I can remember doing a trial at Marco Pierre White's canteen one day, and having these two sous chefs that were at least 10 years younger than me stand over me, just like calling me every name under the sun because I was Aussie, right? Just to see whether I could take it. And at the end of the day, it's like, okay, you want the job? No, fuck off. I mean, today, we're particularly, so many open kitchens, and I think that has changed a lot of the culture within the kitchens, that you have to deal with the public more. Nothing can be hidden. Your hygiene standards are better. It's communication skills are better. You have restaurant groups with actual HR people these days. So and social media, of course, has changed everything. For the good and for the bad, but very very different from those days. There are days when I'd like to go back to those days. That's for sure. But yeah.
Well, you're in Singapore now. It's a city that caters for all levels of food, from high end to the hawker centres. How has the Singaporean hospitality industry adapted overall to the pandemic?
I think most have a lot have closed their doors. I mean, there have been many that have just gone, no, this is, even with the government support, it's just too difficult. But most have adapted very well. The general public, I guess, like in Australia, have come out particularly and been willing to spend money to support all levels of restaurant, but I mean, I know that Dave at Burn End did very well through lockdown, and staff got, through deliveries and getting a whole bunch of new customers. I actually thought some of the higher end restaurants might be the first to go, but then once we knew we were able to not pay rent and had some support, they seemed to have weathered the storm quite well, actually, because they're I mean, we've lost a lot of staff, and it's very hard to find staff now. Everybody's advertising, but with no foreign workers, it's very difficult because the Singapore workforce is not that big. So I know they're in talks now to try and work out how you can get the border open to Malaysia, because a lot of the workers are from Malaysia. I lost two of my boys, one of his own accord, and the other one, it was just time to part ways. But that, otherwise I would have been having to pay levies for those workers as well as pay them, and we just couldn't afford to do both. And at least everybody's getting that subsidy from the government, which has meant that most places can operate. And July, look, we opened up again in July. July was good. August was not bad. September, we've had more rain than I've ever seen before, so it's a bit. We'll see how it goes. I think it's the month is going to be all right. And I so far 3 months back in, I don't hear anybody really complaining in the industry. So I think everybody is just, happy to be back operating. And we're just sort of waiting, like, when can that 10:30 rule, be extended? When can we still only allowed maximum 5 people in a group. But talking to people, they don't think it will be, most likely not this year. So we have to just, everybody just has to comply and get on with it. And life in the gilded cage is not so bad.
As you mentioned, the hospitality sector there is very reliant on international workers. And there's also been a lot of restaurants open in Singapore in the last decade with expat chefs and a huge expat community. What is the scene there like? What's the food of Singapore like, and where do you like to eat when you go out?
Oh, I try and support all my fellow Australian chefs in the industry as much as possible. Burn Ends by far is probably my second home. Second home, because I probably spend more time there than I do in my own home, away from Lokal. What Dave does there, the simplicity of it is fantastic. What Rishi does at Cheek. You have Jason Jones doing the Loco group. We're a very close, tight-knit community amongst the Aussie chefs. But then I love the hawker centres. I love eating the local food, be it Malay, Chinese, or Indian. That's one of the fabulous things about being here. And then there's quite a broad spectrum of places, from the very high end, as I said, down to the hawker. And I try and get round most of them. That probably a few too many French restaurants here, I think. Yeah, and it'll be. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens come March when the government subsidies run out. Whether there will be further closures, but I hope not, because I want the industry to, I love going out and seeing what people are doing and trying new stuff, and trying to support everybody. And with the neighbourhood where Lokal is, it's very much a hospitality sort of area. A lot of bars, a lot of restaurants, all through there. We've even got Shake Shack has moved into the neighbourhood now. Which it's been fun watching the social distancing on the queue, which just makes the queue 10 times longer. It goes around the block. We a lot of very good Japanese here as well. It's not it's been a long time since I spent any time back in Australia, but I think it's just as diverse in Australia now as here, probably.
How do you feel about Australia at the moment and being so far away in Singapore and with family here? Has this time affected you?
Yeah, well, actually, my family is sort of spread all over. With Mum back safely in North Queensland, that was my main concern. My two daughters are in New York. One's working, and one's just moved there to start college. So that's a huge concern, because we can't leave here, and so you worry on that sense. But I see that Australia has actually done quite well. I think they probably should have enforced masks much earlier, and it might have been even better. But when I look at the states that have done well, and I see people going about their normal lives, I'm very jealous. It's like I'd like nothing better than to get in the car and drive for a couple of 100 miles. So go to a beach. It's all a bit Groundhog Day sort of thing here at the moment. Which I'm thankful that we're safe, and it's going well and still open. But yeah, but at the same time, when I see the protests in Melbourne, I don't understand. Yes, I can understand the economic, particularly from a business perspective. It's terrible, but you got the way things are. You've just got to wait it out. You've just and if you're meant to close, you're meant to close. And on the other side of this will come opportunity. And yeah, you may need to stay on JobKeeper and be unemployed for a while, but there will be work out there eventually.
When we do get to the other side of this and there is work out there and the industry's chugging along again as it does, how are you going to look back at this period of time?
Oh, I suppose I'm going to one day relate it to my grandchildren. Like stories I've heard about the Great Depression and the World War and stuff like that. So it'll just be a part of history. We got through it. We did it. And it just, you adapt and survive, and then whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, sort of thing. So,
well, as we do open up, what are you most looking forward to over there in Singapore?
Getting off the island. Getting on a plane and going to Phuket actually, I was talking to a good mate of mine, Jake Kelly, who's now down at the Lee Street Wine Room in Adelaide, and I said, well, I'm thinking South Australia might be high on the cards as soon as we can travel. I'd love to. I've never been over to Western Australia and watching what Colin Wood is doing with cheese and stuff over there. I would love to go and do a drive around Western Australia. So yeah, I mean, but when that will be. When we will be able to do that, I'm not sure, but those would be high on my list. Getting back to Hong Kong, getting back to Bangkok, eating food that I all around this region that I miss. But I think most, like, just to spend a few days sitting on a beach doing nothing would be just bliss at the moment. That's for sure.
Well, I think a lot of people would echo those sentiments. Darren, really enjoyed having you on Deep in the Weeds today. Keep in touch, and
Mate, thank you very much.
We'll talk again soon.
For sure. Thank you very much, mate. Stay safe.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.